This is Our View, the television voice of Washington working families, brought to you by the people who work for you, the Washington Federation of State Employees. With new Washington law covering the selling of liquor and marijuana, the state's liquor enforcement officers need expanded authority to meet the challenges of these changes. Those officers have been meeting with legislators so they can continue to provide community safety.
We feel that with investigations that we're going to be doing, especially with 502, that it's going to lead to other crimes that we don't have, our scope of authority can't handle. For instance, if we had an unlicensed retailer of marijuana and served a search warrant on the house and there were weapons involved or other sorts of crimes, we couldn't contain that scene until other law enforcement got there because our scope of authority would not allow for that. So there are a lot of gray areas right now, we feel like, that puts ourselves at risk. So we see officer safety concerns there, as well as public safety and liability concerns. So our union members are really adamant that we need to broaden our scope of authority to be in line with other police agencies, from a limited authority Washington peace officer to a general authority Washington peace officer.
Even though the public sees us as a full-time peace officer with a badge on our neck, a sidearm, we can't act on that because of our limited authority. Our limited authority has to pertain to the liquor or to the tobacco, not to any other case that occurs at the establishment. So the public's perception of us at this point right now is that we have the full authority.
There's a definite public safety element to this. For instance, if I were in a bar with another liquor enforcement officer and we had domestic violence occur in front of us, we cannot take immediate action that situation would require. Likewise, if we pulled up to a bar and there were toddlers in the back seat and the mother or father were inside drinking, we could not take action against that crime, even though there are immediate public safety concerns. And then with marijuana coming on board, we know that or suspect that there's going to be cartel activity, infiltrating the state. So we're going to be dealing with a high level of crime and with definite public safety implications there.
The wealthy and the corporations are at it again, now trying to get the 2/3 tax vote necessary in the legislature into our state's constitution. If accomplished, it would be a disaster.
What we're looking at today is another attempt to, and actually constitutionally enshrine in our Constitution, a tool that will help rig the system for the rich and corporations and make it impossible to invest in the things that we know grow jobs and the prosperity for all Washingtonians. What it is we would require a 2/3 majority of the legislature to raise revenue, something that we have been battling on the ballot almost every 2 years, but this would put it in the Constitution and would make it very, very difficult for the state to manage its finances, to invest in the things that we know grow jobs, and would permanently give a tool for the rich and powerful to rig the system in their favor and make sure that they don't pay the same share of responsibility for investing in our state's future. What it would basically allow is only 17 legislators to block balanced approaches to the state's fiscal challenges. So currently under the 1053 initiative, which the legislature currently is operating under, even though the lower court has started out as being unconstitutional and the Supreme Court's working on a ruling, all fees have to have a simple majority vote, which has never been the case. It's just terrible fiscal policy. Agencies used to be able to set their own fees, figure out what their budgets are, if a park needed to raise a fee to operate, if driver's licenses need to be raised. They didn't have to bring it before the legislature to check off on all of these things. It's a level of micromanagement that is not good fiscal policy. So this constitutional amendment would enshrine that in the Constitution, and require all fee increases to do that as well. And then anything that is a general tax would require a 2/3 vote of the legislature. The other thing that is really important to understand is that this is totally inconsistent with the fact that the legislature does and will create new tax breaks with a simple majority constantly. But we would be required to do a 2/3 vote to get rid of any tax break, which most of them have no measures about whether they're creating jobs. Most of them actually are not growing their economy, and very few of them have any sunset like everything else in the state budget. Every 2 years, the state budget comes up, we make choices about it, we cut things out of it, we cut it out with a simple majority, but the tax breaks have none of that same scrutiny. So the totality of this measure would create all sorts of fiscal challenges. And in fact, when we've looked at other states that have these restrictions, the bond rating agencies have said this is a terrible way for a state to operate and have lowered their bond ratings, which has meant that those states have had to pay more to take out bonds to do things like build bridges, build schools, build other state institutions, the things that Washingtonians care about. So it's just not good policy. It's not the way that we believe democracy works, and would help rich Washingtonians avoid paying their share of responsibility for everything that we value.
According to the Center for Disease Control, many of the viruses we pick up can be traced to the cooks, servers, and other employees in restaurants. Why? It's simple. Very few of them get sick leave, and missing work can mean the rent money.
You know, we do have a serious issue in our society. Most of us assume, I think, many of us who've had kind of middle-class jobs throughout our lives, assume that most people get some sick leave, some vacation. If they have a family emergency, they can deal with it. But there's an awful lot of people in our workforce who don't get a single day of paid sick leave, who have no flexibility on the job. So when the school nurse calls, they can't go pick up their child. Or if they're sick themselves, they either have to decide, go to work sick and spread their disease to their coworkers and their customers and everyone else, or stay home, lose that day's pay, and risk actually losing their jobs as well. We've heard from the Centers for Disease Control, as well as through a number of other studies, that a really high percentage of nasty viruses get spread from sick food workers. At least half of the norovirus cases, and maybe as much as 80%, according to some of the latest studies, get spread by sick workers. And norovirus is what I think most of us think of as the stomach flu. Majority of people who work in restaurants, even people who work in Starbucks, don't get any sick leave at all. So they're among those people who are making that choice. Go to work when you're sick, or lose the pay, maybe risk losing your job too. That's not good for any of us. There is a pretty easy solution. Seattle, a year ago, passed a sick and safe leave ordinance that says all employers who have employees in the city of Seattle, if they have more than 4 employees, have to provide a minimum standard of paid sick leave. This is something where everyone has a stake in this, right? Everyone goes to restaurants, everyone goes grocery shopping. Shockingly, many grocery workers, even though in theory they may have some sick leave, oftentimes they can't use that sick leave until they're out for 3 days. That means they're making that decision if they have to take 2 days off without pay and get demerits in their file for every day that they miss. We've seen what happens when we leave it to the private sector to solve this problem. In fact, most employers do provide paid leave, but there are certain industries where without a standard in place, there are certain employers where without a standard in place, a pretty significant portion of the workforce is going to continue not to have any access to paid sick leave. That impacts the health and economic well-being of those families, but also all of us are impacted by that as well.
Tough budget times is the time to cut what we invest in education. Not a good idea, according to a specialist at TUAC, as he looks at the worldwide workforce.
Well, education becomes even more vital. I think we have to stay optimistic. Hopefully we can get out of the economic crisis. The skill set of young people has got to be maintained and preserved. It's absolutely vital that's the case. And the role of teachers is also to teach optimism and hope. Schools are optimistic places. And the worst thing for society is if young people leave school depressed, pessimistic, with no hope for the future. That is an awful prospect for society. So teachers have two roles, teaching the basic skills, but also teaching hope and optimism, and that goes right the way across the piece. Now within the trade union movement, teachers are absolutely vital as well. And one of the best things I've seen is where trade unions and employers work out relationships where they are providing the education, the employers are buying into trade union education, and that's pretty critical as well. The most important thing is that we hold on to our public services, public sector and education provision within the public sector to ensure not only that young people are skilled, but as I say, that they actually move into society with optimism that they can make a difference. Well, Trade Union Advisory Committee is absolutely vital. And in fact, actually, the Working Group for Education has a very large number of teacher unions on it who take it very seriously indeed, to the extent that they set up small working groups and look at some of the key issues such as the Programme for International Student Assessment and the Teaching and Learning International Study. TUAC is the site and the basis from which representatives of teachers actually talk about moving policy forward in relation to the OECD, and it has been enormously effective. TUAC is a vital and essential part of the trade union relationship with international bodies like the OECD, but also with individual country governments.
In this month's Labor History, Ross Reader reviews a book.
A few weeks ago, I found a book recently written by a friendly acquaintance of mine. The author is Bill Fletcher, Jr. I met him when he was on the staff of the AFL-CIO, that part of it based in the colony of Washington. Later, some mates and I had a radio program called Part of the Union, and we interviewed Bill Fletcher about a previous book he'd written, Solidarity Divided, The Crisis in Organized Labor. His new one is They're Bankrupting Us, and 20 other myths about unions. Some of these myths are corporate bosses and their lackeys in the media referring to union leaders as union bosses. For example, is an attempt to smear. Some of you may remember the Republican gubernatorial candidate a few campaigns ago who ran a TV ad referring to his opponent being supported by union bosses with the big ashtray, fat cigar smoking, etc. Another, unions were good once, but we don't need them any longer. Man, is that a load of you-know-what. Even workers who aren't in unions wish to a higher degree these days that they had a union too. Now, the union uses our money for political action, and I have no say in the matter. To the contrary, endorsing politicians and issues in the labor movement takes place in highly structured and democratic practices. Do you believe truly that Walmart or Costco in any way survey or give their workers or consumers about what they support? Unions hold me back from advancing, and if I join a union, I'll never be promoted. That one's a doozy. A union contract would very likely include language covering a promotion, a provision for open and equal opportunity for employees. Frankly, I've often been irritated by the bosses when I see them promote some of union's finest leaders out of being covered by the bargaining agreement. Happens too often. That's just a small portion of Bill Fletcher's new book. It's published by Beacon Press, one of our nation's most respectable and progressive publishers. It's $15 in the US. I urge you to find a copy and read it. If someone you know wants to argue against unions, then here's the rationale you can use to improve your chances of convincing her otherwise.
This has been our view, brought to you by the proud members of the Washington Federation of State Employees. We remind you, when you accept a paycheck for your hard work, you don't give up your rights. Thank you for watching.